Hi, I'm Gabby.
Hi, I'm Victoria.
We're both front-end developers and use open source a lot in order to build great apps and interfaces.
So in this video, we'll give a general overview of what open source is and what you need to know before you start using it in your own projects.
Lastly, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Decrypted By Us content. So what is open source? Open source refers to software whose original source code is freely available and can be modified and redistributed. Several companies, such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter, create and maintain open source libraries that many developers utilize. It's also pretty common for individuals to maintain and contribute to open source projects, making it a great way to collaborate with other developers. Some examples of well-known open source projects include Yarn, which is a package manager, Bootstrap, which is a front-end library, and Atom, which is a text editor. Since open source software is constantly maintained and evolving, you'll often see open source libraries and frameworks used in industry. Using these libraries allows companies to not have to reinvent the wheel when someone's already built something and develop a lot faster. From using front-end development frameworks like Angular to using a library with a consistent design system, open source fulfills plenty of needs in industry. There's a lot of different libraries out there to handle all sorts of needs, but as a result, it's important to make informed decisions regarding which libraries to use. Whenever you use open source technologies, you do sacrifice some of your flexibility and end up relying on whichever library or framework you use. Sometimes you can modify the source code in your own project, but that can be a little tricky if you aren't super familiar with the code base. However, developers are constantly working on updating their open source projects and usually are really responsive when handling issues that you bring up. At this point, we've mentioned the words library and framework to describe these different open source softwares. This difference is actually pretty significant when considering the amount of control you want to have in the application that you're building.
So what is the difference between a framework and a library? A framework decides the setup or architecture of your project. For example, how folders are set up and the ways your files interact with each other. Frameworks come with a lot of pre-written code that you usually don't need to modify, and then you write your code on top of all this. You can kind of see that illustrated out in the graphic below. So in your project, a framework decides how you build and deploy your app and is often referred to as your coding environment. So you'll need to decide what framework to use before you even start to code. On the other hand, libraries are reusable pieces of code you can plug into your project as needed. Libraries can be incorporated into your project, so one project might have multiple libraries. However, one project shouldn't be using multiple frameworks. An example of a framework is Angular. So that means the way that the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files interact with each other is already decided. When you create an Angular app, you'll be provided with code templates, and that will have you structure your code within the given system. Angular already binds JavaScript to HTML for you, which means you won't have to write this interaction for yourself, but then you will have to learn how to use their pre-existing data binding structure. An example of a JavaScript library, on the other hand, is Date.js. You can install this library into your project and call its functions to easily convert phrases like 10 minutes from now or next Sunday into a time format that JavaScript can easily understand. So this saves you the trouble of having to write that code yourself. So as you can see, Angular is a framework and provides more abstract, overarching, and high-level assistance when building your application, while libraries provide more specific and case-specific support. So you can kind of think of framework as like the groundwork and the foundation that you're building your application on, whereas libraries are more like the building block and cement that you might use as tools for once you start building. Now we're going to cover some commonly used libraries and frameworks. So Emotion CSS and Styled Components are two CSS-in-JS libraries that are becoming increasingly popular. When I say CSS-in-JS, this means that styling, usually taken care of by separate CSS files, can now be implemented with JavaScript. With these libraries, you're able to write style-specific to components and dynamically change style based on functions and data.
So React is one of the technologies that's both a framework and a library. React developers at Facebook are not really modifying the source code itself anymore and are really just extending the functionality. React also has several extensions and plugins, indicating that there's already a lot of support for it that's continuing to grow. Bootstrap is actually a really popular library that's integrated into React a lot and can be seen in several web applications. Based on our previous definition of a framework, React fulfills many of the requirements. But in terms of its actual functionality, its primary aim is to build user interfaces. So unlike Angular, React doesn't have as much abstraction and only really fulfills the purpose of building user interfaces. If you want to learn more about React and get started building your own application, check out the other video that we made on it. It's really great for getting started.
Okay, so Vue is a popular new framework that aims to be a lighter weight version of Angular, but still includes Angular's best feature, which is two-way data binding with the DOM. What I mean by that is the document object model that HTML elements take on web pages can be directly connected with data, so that when the data model changes, the view or the display does too. This is really clean for any project requiring live updates. All right, and now we're going to end with some libraries we think are really cool and fun for y'all to check out and maybe use in your projects. So P5.js is a library that was inspired off of Sketch. So it kind of sees the whole browser window as a base canvas element that you can then draw graphics and code on top of. It was designed especially for artists to be able to be really creative with their coding process. So it's really good for interactive graphics, building games, and all that good stuff.
And this is Anime.js. It's also a JavaScript library used for animations. It uses a really simple API and works with CSS properties, SVG, DOM attributes, and JavaScript objects. Animations with CSS, HTML, and JavaScript alone can get pretty tricky, so Anime.js is a really great library for making more complex animations like they have on their website.
Charts.js is a really commonly used library for displaying data visualizations. They have a lot of nice default chart types that you can also combine a lot. And they have really nice default animations with tooltips and built-in interactive graphics. So this is really helpful if you need to create some data visuals in any of your projects.
And D3.js lets you manipulate objects in your document object model based on data. So you can visualize data using HTML, SVG, and CSS. D3 works by binding data to the document object model so that you can make data-driven changes to the documents in the DOM.
ML5.js is kind of like machine learning for front-end coders. It is built on top of TensorFlow, but makes it a lot more accessible and easy to code machine learning models into your own front-end app without needing any of the back-end.
And lastly, Three.js is a JavaScript library that allows you to create animated 3D graphics and display them in the browser using WebGL. I'd highly recommend checking out the Three.js website, as you can see here, to find examples of what different developers have been able to create using this library. It's really cool.
All right, we hope that this video kind of gave you a nice overview of what frameworks are, what libraries are, and how you can incorporate them into your projects to help you envision your dreams.
And thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Decrypted by Us content. Bye.